Welcome to Igniting Imagination. I'm your host, Lisa Greenwood, and I'm here with my co-host and friend, the Reverend Dr. Gil Rendle. Hi, Gil.
Hey, Lisa. Good to be here with you.
Yeah. So this season, we're exploring what it means to lead faithfully in a world that feels uncharted and unsettled. We're centering our conversations around Gil's newest work, Reimagining and Remapping the Religious Landscape, Chaos Before a New Ordering. In this monograph, Gil invites us to look at the changing landscape of faith through a new lens, not by tracking the decline or even growth of congregations, but by paying attention to the many ways people are making meaning in their everyday lives. It's a shift that helps us to see where spiritual life is actually unfolding in homes, workplaces, online spaces, and new forms of community, and how the Spirit is still creating fresh possibilities for belonging and formation. Today's guest, Casper ter Kuile, has been helping us see that new landscape for more than a decade. Casper is the author of The Power of Ritual. He's co-founder of Sacred Design Lab and The Nearness, and co-creator of the beloved podcast Harry Potter and the Sacred Text. His work explores how we create meaning, deepen relationships, and experience beauty in a rapidly changing world, weaving together tradition and innovation, the secular and the sacred. So Casper's projects, from the publication of How We Gather over a decade ago to his new Templeton-funded initiative for spiritual entrepreneurs, reflect a consistent thread, a passion for spiritual formation and belonging in contemporary life. His forthcoming book about covenant continues that exploration, asking what binds us to one another and how we make and keep commitments that give life meaning. So, Gil, as you think about your work on reimagining and remapping the religious landscape, what stood out to you in our conversation with Casper?
Let me start someplace that that just came to me while you were doing that introduction, and
Sure.
that is that you and I were in this conversation where I was arguing that the purpose of this kind of a map is just to say, this is what I see. Can you see it?
Mm-hmm.
And that it's an early map, and that more maps would be coming. I just realized our conversation with Casper is one in which he quite clearly sees what we're seeing, and
Mm-hmm.
his conversation is taking us to places that I had not seen.
Hmm.
And so his experience is deeper in some areas of that map than I will ever be. I'm sure that's the case. But for our listeners, I would want them to kind of be open to the way that he talks about it.
Yeah.
Don't be too narrow in wanting to hear it in a particular way. His experience is so different, and his language is different.
Yeah.
His language is very instructive. So that's kind of where I would be on this.
Yeah. Yeah. If you look at the map, our experience is located deep in one quadrant of the
Right.
map. And I would say Casper's playground is just much wider. It's all over the rest of the map, if you will, or at least in different places on the map than we're
Right.
used to playing. And so I love how he draws on, and he's known us a long time and others who are deeply embedded, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
in traditional congregations. Anyway, known us long enough to be able to draw on some of what we know to think about these other areas on the map, and really helps us to see it in new ways that I think are helpful for our work ongoing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
As always, he'll have me thinking about something different.
Yes, as
Right.
always. Right. So let's listen to our conversation with Casper.
Okay.
Hi, Casper. Thanks for being with us.
Hi, Lisa. Hi, Gil. Great to see you both.
Hello, Casper. Good to be with you.
I have been so looking forward to this. So I'm ready to jump right in. And I want to start with the Substack that you have been writing regularly. And I'm a fan and a subscriber, if you will. So, and you've been sharing reflections on spiritual life and formation. And I'd love for you to start in this place of sharing what you're learning through that process, both from your own writing, but also the community's responses. Um, and I mean, we can go from there, but what are you learning? What are you seeing? What are you hearing?
Yeah. Well, I one of the things I love about writing is that really it's just a way to think out loud. So when I see something interesting, if I write about it, I have to make sense of it in some way. I'm putting it on Gil's map, as it were,
Hmm.
somewhere. I'm making meaning of it, and a lot of the time, the way my brain works, I just see things happening, and they don't obviously relate to each other, but there's something that connects them. So it might be, for example, I was reading this morning about an interspecies council in the UK. This is a process whereby the Department of Rural Affairs engages people to respond to a policy proposal about land use. But instead of just doing a traditional kind of expert-led process where, people who know about land use respond, they did an interspecies council, which is basically a collection of volunteers who show up and are assigned a species to represent. So they might be told, you are pig, or you are otter, or you are the hedgerow, or you are the river. And they kind of have to, a little guided meditation. They get into that perspective as best they can. And then they contribute to this policy process from the perspective of the river. And there was this beautiful essay by a guy who happened to be assigned river in this process, in which he talked about his experience of kind of inhabiting the river's consciousness. Now, what does this have to do with religion and spirituality? On the one hand, nothing at all. But on the other hand, it's an example of people being stretched to have a different perspective about who they are and whose they are, right? Who do we belong to? And not just in the human realm, but really in a broader kind of environmental context. So I read something like that, like I did this morning, and I'm like, my goodness, here is another place on this map where people are thinking about transcendence. They're experiencing community, maybe even a sense of formation of growing into the kind of person they want to be. So that's what I love about the writing, is really it's an opportunity to share what I'm seeing and make sense of it together.
That's fabulous. And I love how you're connecting those dots.
Okay, so if I can, because Casper, one of the things I love is that whenever you take it, it just gets huge. It goes really, really big. Okay, and so now, and let's go back and kind of connect with the monograph again, because you are the one. What would that be? 12 years ago, who got us onto that whole notion of unbundling. You can take things apart, but now
right.
look at what you're doing. Now that everything is taken apart, you are picking and pulling. I mean, and you do that remarkably well, and you make it into some kind of a form. But talk to us about the spiritual pilgrimage of people for whom everything has been unbundled.
Yeah.
Okay. What does that look like for the people that you're with when they pull it together?
Well, there's a couple of things that it looks like. First of all, it's complicated, it's lonely, and sometimes it doesn't happen. That's honestly what we've learned over the last decade. As you said, the three of us got to meet about a decade ago, and one of the gifts in our friendship, Gil and Lisa, is that you have shown me what a good bundling looks like. So if I've maybe stretched, you and your friends to think about the unbundling, for me, it's been a gift to see, well, unbundling is not necessarily the end goal. Maybe what we're in is a moment of trying to rebundle in a way that meets the moment technologically, culturally, economically, ecologically that we're in now. What does it look like to rebundle? Because in this unbundled state, first of all, people don't have a map. There's no, well, you go to church on Sunday, or you go and get your bar mitzvah when you're 13, or that, right? There's no structure or script to follow. And so people who are able to invest the time and energy to try and make something of it, whether that's through their tarot and their astrology, or their, mix of digital sermon listening and local volunteering, right? There's all sorts of ways in which people are trying to put it together. It takes a lot of effort, because you have to be continuously the author of your own experience. Secondly, because everyone has kind of personalized their experience, there's very little collective. Even if you and I might go to the same AA meeting, we're not going listening to the same Tara Brach meditation or whatever it is, right? Because everything is so personalized. Very little of that is shared. So people are lonely. But most of the time, and this was a big takeaway for us after the first phases of remapping work, was that whatever was being offered now was insufficient to the need. There's just a whole lot of people for whom they might be able to plug into one or two things now and then, but there isn't the consistent structures that hold them. And especially in moments of crisis, that's when you really feel the absence of it.
Right.
So I've become more passionate than ever about institutional religion, partly because I see the challenge of this unbundled reality. And maybe this is the dynamic which I'll introduce just to push the point home, is that without a hefty counterweight, people are overwhelmed by the market ideology and the logic of capitalism, achievement, fame, money, power. Like we just, I feel it myself. I end up oriented in that direction because I don't have enough kind of structure to resist that and to help me live out an alternative way of being. And so that rebundling question to something that both makes sense in people's experience, but also is strong enough to withstand this kind of dominance of the market feels like the foundational design question for this moment.
Okay, so, and I know we're going to go a number of places, and we've really got to get to community at some point, what that looks like. But I think before we walk too far from the bundling and unbundling, do you understand your work to be rebundling on behalf of others?
Gil, I have tried, and I'm not sure I've succeeded. One of the projects that I launched a few years ago was called The Nearness. And the play that we made there was, look, you're not necessarily going to have the same theology. You're not going to be in the same location. You're not going to necessarily be in the same life stage. And you might not have the same practices, let alone the language to describe what you're looking for in your spiritual life. But can we create a relational container in which you will commit to making meaning of all that variety in your own personal life together with other people? And so the invitation was, sign up for an 8-week journey. You'll meet for 90 minutes every week for 8 weeks with a group of 4 or 5 other people. And I think what we did very well was to create a kind of peer-facilitated structure. And we literally gave them a script to follow. It was very structured. So it did that rebundling quite intentionally. And we gave them a series of different reflection exercises every week. And each group had a covenant. And there was, ritual to open and close the space. And I think we did a really good job on the design. Where we couldn't get it to work was for it to grow. And one of the profound challenges, there's 2 I'll mention. One was that we, and I'm speaking here in the broad kind of cultural we, don't yet value relationships enough to want to pay for them. It just doesn't reach into our pocket. Even if we meet our, future person that we're dating or a roommate or a best friend, like we just don't see the value of that yet economically. And secondly, even if I had a wonderful experience in my small group, my experience of why it worked was I loved the people in my group. And so I can't promise you that you're going to have a great experience because I don't know who's in your group.
Right.
Rather than thinking as I did, I think the structure of this conversation that we set up is going to be excellent enough to hold whoever comes into it in a way that's going to be meaningful. So I'm saying all of that to say I have tried to do that rebundling work with mixed success. But I think we're just in this period where we're all trying things and, many things work. But I'm still puzzling it out.
Feels like you're fighting against a culture of individualism. Like if you think about the equipping, there is that you're doing and others, but there is a kind of a DIY aspect of it, and that's appealing. I get to pick and choose from this unbundling. I get to remix in the way that I want it to look. And what you've leaned into, and I think this has been a thread from the beginning, and the work that you and Angie did with how we gather, and you identified loneliness. You identified the need for belonging. And Sacred Design Lab with you and Angie and Sue along the way, you've said, belonging is a critical piece of this. So I think it's really interesting for you to say that we don't
Yeah.
value relationships enough for it to dig deep into our pockets. And if we go back to scripture, where your treasure is, there your heart is also. I mean, that says something about how much we value relationships. When I think what all three of us would say is, and really what the gospel would say is that relationships really are at the heart of what it means to be a flourishing human. And yet it continues to fall down the list, if you will, of our importance. And so I don't know what to say about that, but I really would love for you to speak into what that means for this moment and what you're seeing.
Well, hilariously, as the person who's not been baptized on this call, I'll say it's more than flourishing. It's where God lives, Lisa. And I think actually, in some way, what I'm pointing to is my answer to your question too, which is that one of the challenges in this kind of unbundled world is that we don't share language. And so it's very difficult to point to the shared commitments.
Right.
And so I've become more and more passionate about claiming the word God and theological language, because it's actually really helpful to point to in opposition to the rest of the pressures that are on us. Now, we all know how that can lead us down dangerous paths, right, in terms of exclusion and narratives of worthiness and not worthiness. But fundamentally, to be able to claim holiness as a desired direction, it's kind of useful. So that's something that's at the edge of my own creativity of how can I talk about God in a way that invites and compels that it has power, without immediately, shutting down the conversation I actually want to be in. So that's I think that speaks a little bit to your question, but this question of loneliness and the experience that people have of just not living with the kind of connection they have. The irony, of course, is we're more connected than ever through technology, but the quality of the connection that we have feels so weak and frayed. A friend of mine who's working on a project around loneliness among men specifically, found recently that this was based on survey data that a quarter of men without a college degree have no friends at all. And he's doing follow-up interviews now. And even among the men who said they had 5 or more friends, when he's actually talking to these guys and asking them, well, tell me about them, in terms of his kind of sociological categories, they don't have the friends they say they do. So I think the extent to which just our relational poverty is shaping our politics, right? The intense identification with political movements, and maybe on the right and the left, but that sense of wanting to belong to something so much that I might sacrifice things that I otherwise would have a little bit more of a question about, feels really, really important in understanding the map that Gil has laid out for us.
Well, let me jump in at that point too, because I think one of the questions I've been waiting to ask you, Casper, has to do with this notion of embedded and disembedded. And that's a sociological idea that I got from Ted Smith and the work that he was doing around theological education. But it really talks about how far into a community a person is willing to go and commit. So that there's, you have to overstep the boundary in and overstep the boundary out. Okay, is that kind of paradox people talk about? We are now more connected, but more isolated than ever before. Okay, so does that have to do with people kind of connecting without embedding with each other? I mean, is it a lack of a willingness to go in and stay and be part of it? Anyway, that's what I'm wondering where you are on that.
Okay, let me try and organize my thoughts on this, because there's so much that I'm still struggling with on this question. The first thing I'll say is, I think just as a general script culturally that a lot of people are in right now, is that connection is experienced online, and offline we mostly experience transaction. So the places where we go to seek out relationship are mostly digital. And that's everything from dating apps, right, as well as FaceTime and everything else. And the kind of the world we navigate IRL in real life is, well, I have to, get the groceries or whatever it is. Like it's mostly transactional. So I think there's something there about formation again, that we're being trained in a particular direction in our in-person interaction. So that's the kind of foundational level. The second thing is that the embeddedness used to be experienced as safety. If you think about a kind of immigrant story to America, right? You arrive as a member of the Lithuanian population, whatever it is. I live in Ukrainian Village, in the East Village in New York City. The kind of ghosts of the embedded institutions here, of Ukrainian cultural centers and opportunities to find work, and also, the places you would meet people. Embeddedness meant safety. This was a place where you would be supported, where you would you wouldn't fall through the cracks. But now embeddedness, I think, is experienced as risk. If you look at young Jews and their relationship to Jewish institutions, a lot of the hesitation is about the institutional advocacy around Israel. And so a lot of young Jews, it's not even that they're against Netanyahu's government or the policies of the state. They're just like, I don't fully understand this, and I'm not willing to be represented by this institution to the world around me. So I don't want to affiliate with this institution because it doesn't feel like an authentic expression of who I am. And so rather than presenting safety, that institutional affiliation represents risk. My authenticity, my character, my brand, if I can even use that word, is going to be diluted, weakened, compromised. So I think that's another fundamental shift. And so even just the design of social media, right? We follow individual influencers who we can then also unfollow. So the kind of orientation towards affiliation is to individuals rather than institutions. I think that's another part of it. Here's the final piece, and this is where I'm most confused. I need to protect some identities here, so I'm gonna call this organization LAMP. I'm just looking around my living room and I'm seeing a lamp, so we're gonna call this organization LAMP. LAMP is one of the most effective new communities, one of these very porous experiential communities that offers people the opportunity to be creative for half a day or a whole day with a group of somewhere between 30 to 150 strangers. People love this experience. They're making some sort of art together, and I won't be too precise, but it's a collective artistic experience that people feel transformed by. They love it. And they pay for it. They'll pay for it. Not a huge amount, but something like $35, up to maybe $50 or something. And so this organization has experienced a huge amount of growth over the last 3 years. And partly what they've been able to do is at the end of each of these kind of one-day creative experiences, they have a professional person who films the experience and then posts it online. And so people are like, look at what I helped make. Look at the beauty that I contributed to. There's me in the corner, or here's my little moment. And they share it. And so this organization has grown to more than 500,000 followers in a short amount of time, has built a financially sustainable model, which is truly extraordinary for this kind of organization. But, and here's the challenge, the embeddedness of participants is very weak, but the embeddedness of the leaders is very strong.
Yeah.
So much so that the leadership got in a real funk because the structure of the organization was an LLC, was just a person who set it up by themselves. They didn't really think too much about the organizational logistics. It was kind of a sort of collective and shared decision-making. And then, of course, once it gets real, you have to make real decisions about who gets this gig. Yeah, and that involves wins and losses and politics and everything else. And I'm really sad to say, I tried to step in to help this organization, which is why I've kind of seen it up close over the last 6 months. And it was too far down for my limited skill set to help it get out of its funkiness. And what I'm trying to illustrate here is that what this organization was missing was the tiered stepping stones from the very loosely, porous boundary at the edge, which is very effective, into deeper embeddedness, and to understand both the rights and the responsibilities that level of embeddedness would mean. And I think it was the lack of formation that I hate to say it, but I feel like the organization will probably disappear within the next year, which is leading to its downfall.
Well, can I follow up on that?
Yeah.
Because it prompts another question in my mind that I've not asked in this way before. But the other thing that I'm following is the impact that the internet is having on the plasticity of the brain, and the fact that we are in fact being rewired in a new way. And it's the fellow who wrote the book on the shallow and the super bloom. I think I'm missing the name. I'm always sorry when I do that. But his argument is that someone will no longer read a book
Yeah.
because that means sustained attention. And you have to be able to follow the argument and so forth. And so everything that people are now getting are, short and blog form and so forth like that. But that, if you go to, anywhere that you are looking at materials and there are links embedded,
Yeah.
every single link is an invitation to go think about something different. You come with this question, but you are constantly being invited away from it. Okay.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is his argument is around the plasticity of the brain, that we're actually being trained to give attention in short spurts. We can no longer manage full ideas, or the logic behind them. How much of a carryover would you want to guess that has to do with relationships? That people would go into an organization and they would participate in creativity, love the 12 seconds that they got on the thing, and then move on because their attention's okay. Let's just start right there. And am I an old man with a different worldview bias?
What I don't want to fall into the trap of is dismissing the integrity of the experience that these people are having, right?
Right.
That it's meaningful to them, it's
Right.
beautiful, and it's good. Like I've been to these events and it's really fantastic. It's thoughtfully designed. People are, being asked to reflect on their day. What's something beautiful? What's something hard? They're having authentic conversations. All of that is good. But where your challenge feels very real is there is no invitation to then, except for come again to another one,
Right.
or maybe grow into, grow in your artistic skill set so you could be a facilitator down the line. But there's no real pathway. That's why I love that word formation that you introduced. And I really think formation is the right word because we are having to learn. We are being encultured in one way, and we're having to learn. We have to find spaces to practice that different way of being that does suggest continuity and continued proximity even beyond our own comfort. Because I think partly the way we have as a generation, and certainly younger, have been trained to engage with relationships is from a consumptive mindset. Am I getting what I want from this friendship? Is this sister-in-law coming for Thanksgiving serving me? And very rarely are we affirmed in doing something that is not, quote, good for us in the short term or in an immediate, right? So that, and of course, we have to be careful here, right? Not every relationship is one we will stay in forever. That's understandable, et cetera, et cetera. But the orientation towards consumption of experiences and consumption of people, I think is very, very real. And I have not seen enough, and I've tried to create them too. I don't know yet exactly how to create things that have the attractional quality of the community that we were just describing, and yet the depth and the kind of wisdom that takes people beyond it. Because I think you have to start where people are, and that has to be good enough as a place of beginning, but it also can't be the end point.
I think you're getting at actually one of the fundamental issues for what it means to be the church or a congregation today. Because I think we have formed all of what we, the aspects of what we do in the congregation around this sort of attractional model, which means we have formed consumers more than we formed disciples, because there is this surrender, there is sacrifice, when you are part of a community and a common good, and when you give your life over to following Jesus, there is this surrender, right? There is this, I'm part of something that has a goodness of the whole in mind. And so, and that most often counters like a consumer, is this good for me? That, okay. So I just think that's a profound struggle of congregations, as well as, what it means to be in the world today.
But what I love so much, if I may, what I love so much about your conversations together between the two of you in the first part of this season was also the understanding that the embeddedness of the current congregational model, right? The assumptions of the structures of a congregation today, that also doesn't work. So
Right.
it's this, that's the design challenge, is like, how can we keep this North Star, and this is not a word I use every day, but I'll use it because I'm a guest in your house today, of becoming disciples, while being able to have a conversation with our neighbors. I love that invitation of an illustration of what the right structure would look like, is a structure that helps us know and be in relationship with our neighbors. And for a lot of the religious landscape today, that's just not real.
Well, let's switch, and it really isn't changing the conversation in any way. It's simply looking through another facet here. So let's talk about community, because so much of your work has been around community. And the fact is that whenever someone joins a community, if they are in that community, the community is forming them.
Yeah.
Now, this could be an ethnic community. This could be kind of a professional community. Whenever you are in and identify and stay there, you are being formed. You will accommodate their norms. Okay. And so when we're at that point, what have you learned about community? I mean, that was where your question started all those years ago. And what have you learned about sustaining community?
One thing I'm paying a lot of attention to these days is the way in which people like me use the word community when they actually mean identity. I think there's a really, and I mean, as a gay man, I see this a lot with like the gay community. I'm like, what does that mean? And of course it does mean something, but there's a sense in which the communities I belong to really are just another expression of me communicating what's important to me to the world, rather than revealing my relational commitments. And so I become really interested in proxies for deep relationship. Like, do you know the same songs? Are you driving each other to the hospital? Those kind of classic questions of care. And I love the notion of refugias that you pointed to in the paper, Gil, because there are so many wonderful islands of sanity. I can't remember who gave us that phrase, but that's one I've turned to many times. That is Meg. Yeah. Okay, wonderful. Because, but they are small. They are very, very small. Not small in number, but small in scale. Because I think our capacity to hold healthy community really is at the sort of household scale at this point. By which I don't mean a single family, but I mean a small group of friends or a small group of someone. And this is why I've become so passionate about this notion of covenant as a tool, as a relational technology to help us hold ourselves in relationship, to help us pay attention to the quality of our connection beyond our own immediate comfort, countering that consumerism thing, and anchoring in the values that we share, right? Like putting that holiness at the center. And so I see it, I see community in the way that we're talking about it in all sorts of places. I'm just trying to think of, I mean, I'll give you one example. Another one from my own life. I host a monthly singing community, a singing night in my house. And there's an email list of about 100 people. And there are usually about 15 to 20 people who come. But there are 5 people who are there every time. And that is the heart of my own little refugia in the city of New York. These are the people who I created the Solstice in the Park Festival with, the project I worked on last year. These are the people who I defaced the AI posters with on the friend.ai posters that were plastered all over the city that were just a moral offense. And so we snuck out at night with pens and wrote, call your mom, and real friends hurt each other sometimes, and that's okay. Onto these posters. But that's the kind of the backbone of not just my social life, but like my life here in the city. And the thing that surprised me was that they were not the friends I was looking for. They were not the kind of maybe they'll listen, so I love you guys. But they weren't the like shiny, achievement oriented New York people that I thought would be the bedrock of my life when I moved to this godforsaken city that I love. But they kept showing up. And about 2 years into it, I was like, I've got to pay attention to this, because these are the people who are here. These are the people who I can rely on, and I need to be reliable to them. And it really oriented my own community experience. I think that was a formative moment of like, what was I really chasing in friendship? And realizing, oh, it's the wrong thing. Here is what's real, and here's what I can build on. And both the singing community and other things have flourished because of that beating heart of that real community.
Okay, I want to continue on that thread, but I want to go back to something you said earlier. And you talked about, and this surprised me, so it's going to stay with me and I'm going to keep wrestling with it, that online we're finding connection and IRL is more transactional. And yet I think we would all agree there's something about being in real life with humans in your living room, creating Advent stars, for instance, as we got to do together last year, or whatever it is, singing or that kind of thing. So I guess I want to play with that a little bit, thinking about community, thinking about embeddedness, thinking about all those things. But here's the question, because I think congregations are asking this: what is the role of online platforms and not just in getting together, but in spiritual formation today? Yeah.
Well, this is one of my favorite questions to think about, Lisa, which is, what is the rhythm and the kind of mixed media of our religious life? Maybe for the next few decades, maybe for the next century, I don't know. But we have been used to a place-based, denominationally affiliated Sunday morning, right? Like, same people, same time, right? Like that's the model that we've had, and that's what we deem as legitimate religious communal life, right? That's the kind of gold standard, and for good reason. The patterns I'm noticing are that people want something in person. The first thing they want in person is a sort of seasonal, multi-day, transformational, transcendent, touching, nature-based experience with a large group of people. And I think part of the kind of Eras tour, and I love that Gil was talking about Taylor Swift. I was like, this man is so in touch with everything. But I think that's part of what like concert culture is getting at, right? These large transcendent experiences that are multi-sensory, that really get you into the fullness of your body. Right? We can think about the classic here is Burning Man, but it doesn't have to be that cliched. But it could be summer campy. But anything that is basically maybe 3-4 times a year. And by the way, this is very biblical if we think about the pilgrimage festivals of yesteryear. But a moment in which you lose yourself as an individual into the bigger collective. That's what's going on. Then you gather at the table. And so I think what the other IRL experience is a domestic, regular, meal probably based ritual gathering that's weekly with the same people. And again, I'm thinking at the household size here. So I'm influenced by Andy Crouch's work, but something between 3 to 12 people, something like that. And the regularity of it. And this is where the digital comes in. All of that is sustained by high quality digital resources. So we don't all need to preach a sermon anymore because we can listen to the best sermon givers out there, right? Like that content generation piece that has happened so much at the congregation level. I think that is the kind of stuff that can be done, I don't want to say centrally, but at least in a sort of networked, digital model. So people can access inspiration, they can access teaching, they can access maybe even some of the analysis, right?
Right.
Whether it's as well as entertainment, of course. But that's if I was to, I don't want to use a violent metaphor, but if I was going to be given a cake to give you a prediction of the future of religious life, I think it's something about seasonal, transcendent, large-scale in-person gatherings, local, weekly, domestic even, meal-based ritual gatherings, and then really excellent quality content. And one of your kind of sister philanthropic efforts in the Jewish world, the Lippmann Kampfer Foundation for Living Torah, has had a similar analysis. And what they're funding now is excellent Jewish wisdom content and small group experiments in Jewish life. That's the Chabura model that Gil does for as well. So for me, that's the kind of pattern that I'm looking at between this digital and IRL design.
Okay. Lisa, if it's okay with you, I'd like to turn a corner here because we only have Casper for so much time.
Right, please.
And the other thing that is really, I think, on our hearts and minds here is that you are one of those people who not only is out doing that entrepreneurial work in the whole sphere of both humanness and spirituality, but you're also supporting a whole lot of other people who are doing it in multiple ways, and you are becoming a platform for the work of other people, the place where they can connect. And that this is your website launch that you've just done and everything. Talk to us about what you're learning about being a platform for others and how they're using you or hope they're going to use you.
So this is a new platform that we launched called spiritualinnovation.org. And it really has been a collective effort. So Sacred Design Lab has led the charge, but we're part of a constellation of organizations, among which Wesleyan Impact Partners, that is seeking to support this kind of ecosystem of spiritual innovation. And I think maybe the things that we have been lucky enough to have a particular perspective on over the last few years is a global angle. We were lucky enough to receive a grant from one of the Templeton Foundations to explore what's happening in spiritual innovation around the world, from Australia to Kenya to Japan and Romania and Brazil, all sorts of fascinating places. And a few things that stood out, first of all, were that although the context often differed, especially the relationship between the state and religion, that conversation is very different in Egypt than it is in Indianapolis. But nonetheless, the challenges that spiritual innovators faced, and I mean spiritual innovators both within religious traditions, completely outside of them, and at the edge, all of them struggled with really familiar challenges. They felt alone in their creativity, often like, am I the only one doing this? Has anyone done this before? They needed to figure out funding. How do I make this project sustainable? What's the right legal category? Of course, the exact answers to that, again, differ widely across the country or across the world. But also questions of integrity. How do I translate this tradition in a way that honors the past but is relevant to today? So those kind of questions kept coming up. And so we've designed the site around those core themes. So if you go to the site, you'll see a sort of matrix with these core themes. And if you click on them, you'll be able to access all sorts of resources and videos, podcast episodes, excellent monographs that you could read and learn about. But also organizations that might be like yours that you can learn from or that you can connect with. And so that's kind of that resource bank is the first half of the site. The second half is a directory in which we hope people can create a profile of themselves and learn more about other people working at the intersection of spirituality and art, or other people who are in India thinking about these questions. But as with any digital resource, it lies fallow unless there's life. And so we know that we need to keep continuing connecting people, making direct introductions, but also hosting. We've been hosting a series of Zoom webinars where we, ask some of these questions or bring in someone to share their story or have an expert come and teach their wisdom. And that's really where things come to life. So I would say the digital platform in terms of its efficacy, we only launched in October, so it's still very new. Right. But those are definitely lessons that we've learned from elsewhere. As without someone hosting the digital space, it doesn't live. And I'm very conscious that it's still massively shaped by our particular location, social and geographic location. So it's heavily US centered in a world that's of course much bigger than us here in the United States. So it's imperfect, but I hope it's a start. But I think one of the things it does is maybe some of that rebundling, at least at the level of leaders of these communities, not necessarily participants of them, because it's really geared at people who are creating a project or starting a community, but that this is a place that whether they're drawing on the Wesleyan tradition or a Wiccan one, there's going to be resources here that inspire them or help them. And so I think one of the gifts maybe that we've been able to give is to break through some of those denominational or tradition silos and help people see what they can learn from one another across those contexts.
Well, let's go to the other side of the equation, because I mean, if I think about traditional religion, particularly organized religion in institutional forms, it has not only its polity. There are the rules by which you must do things. It also has the guardrails to keep you from doing damage.
Yeah.
And so, with the kind of connecting that you're finding, are there any guardrails for people? When they're doing their expression, I mean, let me just stop there. Where are the guardrails?
I mean, practically there are none, right? Certainly, if they're innovating outside of a denominational structure, there really is no formal guide rails. I think there are two significant informal ones. One is, can you make it work financially? Right. So there's something there about, is this attractive to people? But that in itself is not always a guardrail, right? Like that can actually lead you to some pretty dangerous places. And I guess the second one maybe is too related to be a distinct point, but is that sense of reputation among your peers. And so certainly for those who are kind of networked or connected within this field, that there's certainly not necessarily a call out culture, but there is a sense of, has this strayed too far? And that might be about the ethics of translating tradition, as we pointed to. It might be that people kind of find themselves in a different universe when they choose a different legal structure, right? The ethics and the guardrails around a venture-backed company like Hallow or Headspace is very different from a nonprofit or volunteer-based effort that would be more familiar to us in the church world, even though they're both ostensibly there to help people with their spiritual practice. And so those are perhaps some of the guardrails that I could think of. I'm less concerned about guardrails at this point, and I'm more concerned with centers of gravity. I think we need much stronger kind of lighthouses. Maybe that's the right metaphor, as opposed to guardrail, because my experience of the people trying to lead this work is that overwhelmingly they are good. They are choosing to do something hard, something creative, something that they feel a need for in their own life. That's nearly always why they start something. And they're doing the best they can, and it's really, really difficult. And so what they need help with is models of what it looks like when it's working. They need help to figure out the organizational and financial models. They need support of mentors who care about them and their own well-being amidst the work that they're doing. That's really, I think, the limiting factor at this point, much more so than you've crossed a line, you need to stop.
Yeah.
I love that image of lighthouses.
Center of gravity. Yeah. That's perfect.
Yeah.
I think we always walk away with new language when we talk to you, Casper. It's great.
So do I. I'm surprising myself here, Gil. I'm like, lighthouses, that's good.
So good. Okay, so I'm going to bring us to our final question. And this is a question that we are asking all of our guests this season. So what is one practice or perspective that helps you stay grounded and open to God's new thing in this season?
Well, for me, it's relationships. It's friendship. Lisa, I called you last week because I needed help with something. And, maybe from my perspective, what I need less help with knowing the new thing, and I need more help with knowing what is of God. And that's what you did when we got on the phone last week. And so, friendship.
Yeah. Thanks. Beautiful. Well, I value ours, dear friend. And I do think that is one of the beautiful things that friends do is help us see God more clearly. And you do that for me. I'm grateful for our time together. Thank you.
Oh, thanks for both of you and the work of the whole team. I'm so grateful.
Casper, thanks. I love the time with you.
Thanks, guys.